Testing. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for those of you here in the room with us, and welcome to those at home. Tonight we are pleased to have Representative Tawna Sanchez from District 43 in North and Northeast Portland, who spent her life working to strengthen our community. Tawna, who is a Shoshone, Bannock, Ute, and Carrizo, who grew up in Portland, has for many years been a leader fighting for the rights of women, Indigenous people, and the most vulnerable. As the Director of Family Services at the Native American Youth and Family Center, also known as NAYA, Tawna helped create the Early College Academy, expanded early childhood services, affordable housing development, elder support, and assisted in building in a nationally recognized domestic violence wraparound service model.
Over time, Tawna has helped raise 18 foster kids, has been active in state policy making, serving on the Family Services Review Commission and the Child Welfare Advisory Committee. As a state representative, Tawna remains committed to standing up for social justice on the side of the oppressed and pushing to make our systems more equitable. Please join me in welcoming Representative Sanchez to the podium.
It's really hot. Well, thanks so much, folks, for being here. And sorry, I'm just a tiny bit late, and hopefully we didn't mess up the face here very much. But so, well, let's see. What do you want to know? So I guess I would start then just by telling you a little bit about myself, and then you can ask questions if you like, because I feel like that's a better way to have communication. This always feels so sterile and difficult to actually communicate with. So, Tawna Sanchez, as was mentioned, I'm the state representative for House District 43, which is North and Northeast Portland. And I'm also the Director of Family Services at the Native American Youth and Family Center. And in March, it'll be 26 years at that agency. Wow. And I often refer to it as my real life job that pays the bills, because the legislature does not. As much as we in the state of Oregon want to refer to our legislature as a citizen legislature, we sadly, not very many citizens can actually be a legislator unless they have additional resources of their own with which to sustain their families and their life. So I have a real life job. I don't actually technically work full time, but kind of do anyway. And in my job, then I manage domestic violence, foster care, aging and disability and veteran services, and early childhood programs, as well as the food pantries and clothing closets and things of that nature. Very much social services. I have a master's degree in social work. Actually got my bachelor's degree in psychology and communications. I don't even know where it is from this direction. Over Merrillhurst. That way. Okay, that way. And I think that, a good chunk of my life was sort of spent doing really sort of down on the ground social work, working with people, working with families, communities, that kind of thing. And so in 2015, I think it was November 7th, I got a text message from a friend of mine that said, Senator Chip Shields is going to retire. Representative Lou Frederick is going to go for that Senate seat immediately. You should run for Lou Frederick's representative seat. And I literally responded in a text message, "Wahahaha." Like, you gotta be kidding me, no way. And the response, of course, was, I'm not kidding. And, it's pretty much asking me to think about it because, and, again, we were going back and forth for quite some time. But the response was that, at that time at least, we did not believe that there had ever been a Native American person serving in the Oregon legislature. Come to find out, though, very close to the, right up against the primary, we did find out that there was one other person, Jackie Taylor, who was Citizen Potawatomi, served in the legislature in the mid-1990s, or kind of a chunk of time in there. And she was the first. And I am the second Native American to ever serve in the Oregon legislature. Yeah, it's amazing. And you would think with 9 federally recognized tribes in this state that other Native people would have been serving in the legislature by now, and that's just not true. So it says a lot, sadly, just about demographics in the state and how different people feel empowered in some way to step up and do that work. And as I said, it doesn't pay much. As a matter of fact, given the hours that I personally work and many other legislators personally work, we are making significantly less than minimum wage. We're making about $8 an hour, if that, given all the things that we have to do. It's really quite stunning. So we are an oppressed society. I will just say that out loud. The legislature is somewhat oppressed in that they're being paid less than minimum wage. But anyway, the decision to do that, to go ahead and run for that office, as I said, was, I laughed it off at first. But then I thought, they asked me, think about it, just think about it. Because again, representation matters. Being in the room matters. Having somebody in the room who knows what our population thinks about, understands, feels, responds to, all of those types of things is really important. And so I said, yes, I will think about it. And then I thought about every single thing that I did every single day in my real life job that pays the bills, and of the many times that I have actually advocated in front of the legislature, in front of committees or directly to different representatives and senators, recognizing that I had gone many, many times to advocate for the independent living program, right? For both ILPs actually, and for foster care, kiddos in foster care. As was mentioned, I'm a foster parent, or have been. I try not to be anymore because it's really a lot of work, and I feel like kids need time and attention. But for foster care, for domestic violence programs, I was a part of helping to develop the very first statewide funds from the state itself to actually distribute resources for domestic violence programs all over the state. So I got to be a part of it, really an amazing opportunity. And recognizing all of those things and really looking at some of the laws that we make in this state and how they affect people on the ground. And I thought, well, okay, that makes sense. That makes sense to do that then. Because I know what laws do. I know how people are affected by it. Now, I'll give you an example. One of the laws that was passed just prior to my deciding to run for that office was a law called Ban the Box. Anybody know what that is? Yeah, okay. So Ban the Box basically means you don't have to click that, check that box that says you have been convicted of a crime. And while that's a good thing on some levels, so somebody can maybe, apply for a job and not have to click that box and not have somebody immediately think, oh, I don't want you in my business, I don't want you to work for me because you have been convicted of a crime. And I don't know what that crime is, or, and think of all the things in your head. Think of all the things that you're thinking in your head when you think of somebody who's committed a crime. So, and then, one of my other things that I did, and probably still will as soon as we can get back into prisons, I volunteer at Coffee Creek Correctional Facility. And knowing a lot of ladies who came out of that prison, and one of the very first things that they are doing is trying to get a job, right? Trying to get a job and a place to live. And once we criminalize, they've committed a crime. They went to prison for committing a crime. But we continue to criminalize them by not allowing them to get a job or find a place to live because of that criminal background. So Ban the Box on some levels was actually really good. And then there's the other side of it. And I recognize this because I actually had one lady that I worked with for a very long time, and she would apply for a job and get very excited about getting this job, and she'd work for 2 or 3 days, and then they would do the background check, and they would let her go. So Ban the Box worked to allow her to get a job, But I can tell you from my own just personal memory of it, maybe 6 or 7 times she called me and said, they let me go. And so I think, you know, this was prior to me joining the legislature. I thought, this is ridiculous. A law that we created with every intention of having it be a good thing has backfired so horribly on folks who, you know, who are just trying to make it. And we wonder about the issues of recidivism. Like, why do people go back to prison? They go back to prison because we don't allow them to get a job or a place to live and be able to take care of themselves and pay off their fines and do their, you know, their due diligence in taking care of the things that they messed up, right? So it's a harsh thing, but that was one of those additional things that made me think it's probably a good idea for someone like me with the experience level that I have to come into the legislature and say, okay, folks, think it through. Because we have to think long-term. It's not just immediately about what we want to do, a law we want to change, or how we want to make a difference in some way, shape, or form. We have to think the long-term outcomes. What is that law going to do? Who is it going to affect? And how is it going to make a real, long-term, sustainable difference in the way we as Oregonians live? That's what I decided I wanted to do. So in, I think it was actually not even a week later, I said, okay, I'll do this. And then I actually looked at the website, the state capitol website, and talked about legislators and like committees and how much time it takes and just the scheduling and all of that sort of thing. And I talked to my boss and I said, okay, what do you think? And he says, we'll figure it out, we'll make it happen. And I would just tell you straight up, in terms of the time commitment, the legislative website lies like nobody's business. That is so not true. It's absolutely not true. There is so much time that you have to get to this. So very much time. And I don't think, you know, I'm not saying that it's all a bad thing or all a horrible thing. But in order to do it well, you have to show up at the many different places. You have to have many conversations. And you have to do job interviews when you're first starting. You have to do job interviews several times a day, essentially. Like basically all of the PAC interviews and all of that type of thing. It's like doing a job interview every single day for months. It's really quite scary. I know, and I know and understand really clearly why a lot of people won't do it again if they actually try to get elected for a legislative or, you know, county commission position or something like that, and they didn't make it. It's traumatizing sometimes for folks, and I have actually talked to people about it later on and said, would you do it again? And they're like, nope. And I think about it myself. Had I lost, would I do it again? Maybe not. I mean, you know, experience is one thing, but then all that you have to go through to get here, it's really tough. It's actually really, really tough. And then there's the good side of it. There's the good side of going into the legislature and really being able to shift the way other people think about things. And really giving a different perspective so that people understand that, well, let me give you an interesting example. I sat on the Judiciary Committee next to a lawyer who kept leaning over to me and asking, what does that mean? He was a, what is it called? Condominium lawyer. What do they call those? It's a guy who worked with folks who bought condominiums and homeowners and what's the board called? HOA board. Yeah. That's the law that he practiced, was essentially homes and HOAs and things of that nature. He had no clue about criminal law, which of course, you know, me working with folks in Coffee Creek, I had a little bit more experience. But so, again, it's about perspective. What's our perspective on what's going on here? And the down on the ground actual work of things. So that's what I got to do, is go into the legislature and again, give the on the ground perspective of somebody who worked with folks who've come out of prison. You know, someone who worked with families who had their kids taken into the child welfare system. And someone who worked with folks who struggled with domestic violence and evictions and not being able to maintain a job, and addictions, or all of these different types of things. So it was a very interesting thing to try to do that, and again, help really fashion some laws that would make a difference in the long run, I think. So, questions, thoughts? Yes, ma'am.
It's not to speak. Thank you for coming tonight, and thank you for being a legislator. And I'm also a volunteer at Cotton Creek, and thank you for doing that.
Well, thank you.
My question is a little bit hard to explain, but because you talked about the consequences of legislation that we make and how we proceed, I'm very invested in working on universal health care coverage in our state. And we did just pass that amendment to the Constitution that we have a right to access to health care. Right now we have to, there's some procedural, I don't know if that's the right word, way to go about this. Whether we're going to set up the public option, which is giving people more insurance choices, or whether we're going to set up a system that's run as a single payer system. And I have friends in the legislature that sit on both sides of that issue, and I wanted to know your perspective on it, because I think it might be unique. And honestly, I know there's the ideal, which is what we'd like to have a single payer, but I also know that sometimes you cannot get to your ideal right away. And so I want to hear your thoughts on that.
So I've often been told, and I think it's actually very, very true, that when you have an issue or bill in the legislature, or even an initiative petition like the one you're referring to, as long as no one is absolutely happy, it's a good bill. Right? Because you can't make everyone happy. You're never going to be able to do that. There's always going to be, I mean, there are some things that everyone votes for because it absolutely makes sense and it's the right thing. But when there's a controversial issue like that, that you have different perspectives on, it has to be somewhere in the middle. I think at this moment in time, because we have a CCO system right now, and we have essentially allowed pretty much anyone who needed it to get on the Oregon Health Plan, and which we will be doing those redeterminations as soon as the emergency is technically gone away. So within the year, we're supposed to be doing them to 3 to 6 months. The redeterminations are supposed to occur, but we have such a large number of folks on the system right now that those redeterminations will occur shortly after, they will begin to occur, I should say, shortly after the emergency is basically no longer federally required. We'll go there. But if you think about that, that CCO system has actually worked quite well. And I'm not sure if that's the intent. I know single payer has been a thing that people have wanted to do for a very long time. I'll be honest, I have not really looked into that very deeply, because I know the system that we have right this very minute is pretty solid. But I would ask people to maybe think about the current system that we have and whether or not that might work long term for other folks, because the legislature has over and over and over again continued to try to create an access point for cover all kids, cover all people. And then of course the pandemic hit and we essentially opened it up. So the redeterminations will occur, and that means that maybe some people will get off of the current plan and we'll have to look for another way to make it work. I'm not sure, I'm sure there's going to be legislative action about how we manage that measure at this point in time going forward. Yes?
Just as a follow-up, I believe the concern is that group of people that are going to lose that situation because of the emergency being over, basically, supposedly, that before the single payer system could be set up, that they would be without anything, and that is part of the concern. And also, I'm kind of speaking as a traitor to my side of this, but I really want to be in the weeds with this, and since you talk about that as your entry point tonight, I wanted to get, put this out there. I think healthcare is about 1/3 of our budget. I mean, our economy, not our budget, our economy. And I believe if we flip that, there's going to be a lot of reshuffling, and I think that a lot of people are going to be without for a while. And I'm also a family nurse practitioner, and I also have a mother that I just put on hospice. And I want to tell you, our system is very broken. It's very broken. And even people with excellent insurance like myself cannot get the care that's needed for them or their family very easily. So that's just, so I guess what I'm trying to say is I'm very sympathetic to the task that's in front of you, because it's scary to wipe out a system that is set at least somewhat working right now for our state, the way we have our CCOs.
It is somewhat scary to dismantle something or try something new, but we're always looking for ways to do something. And I have to say, the deeply invested insurance industry is going to make that difficult. Mm-hmm. So it's
I would like to divest them.
Yes. Okay. Any other questions or thoughts? Okay, I could talk all night, but yes.
To your point about the amount of effort and time it takes for legislators to do their job, and you may know that for some of us here, our most recent representative in the House, Rachel Kruzak, stepped down along with other women because it was undoable. I mean, she is not independently wealthy and continued to work as a nurse, kind of spoke out against the whole system, which she seemed to feel was discriminatory against people, especially people who are not of means. So I'm wondering, where do you stand on that issue, and what do you think the future of it is in the Oregon legislature?
Well, as I mentioned, of course, in March I'll have 26 years at a particular agency where currently I don't work full-time. I actually went down to 3/4 time my very first year in the legislature, and I never went back up to full-time because, of course, I didn't have the time. The fact that it takes 2 jobs for someone of moderate means to work in the legislature because it doesn't pay well enough. The fact that, let me just say, I have known legislators, younger legislators, much younger than me, who drove Uber on the side, who were contract workers on the side, who did all kinds of different little things here and there in order to be able to serve in the legislature. I know it's difficult. I could not do this job without my current job. Right, I can't do it. There's no possible way. Because I don't have a husband either. I don't have anybody paying the bills, for me. I've always paid my own bills. And so it's really difficult. What's also very difficult is to convince people that they should pay legislators more. It's very difficult. It is and we hear it all the time, like when it's come up in the Willamette Week is really good at saying legislators want a pay raise. They want you to pay them, 3 times what we're paying them now. But then, of course, they don't really say. They say what we're being paid right now. They don't really recognize the time and effort put into it. And so it's a difficult. You're a rock in a hard place. It's definitely a rock in a hard place. I was so disappointed to lose Rachel. And I worked really hard on her campaign, as a matter of fact. I door knocked for her and did lots of different events with her in an effort to get her into the legislature because I knew that we needed her, as well as Anna Williams, who also left, as well as Karen Power, who also left. It was a very difficult situation for them. And I truly understand how hard that can be. But I also, again, kind of, as I said, rock and a hard place. You really want to help people understand, like, what we're being paid for is a really, really tough job. And again, if you're not independently wealthy in some way, shape, or form, or have a significant other who is, who has a job that you can, that they can maintain the life that you're used to, or, your house or your car, all of those types of things, it makes it very, very difficult. And so I wouldn't mind at my age retiring from my other real life job that pays the bills. I would not mind that. But I don't know that we're going to be able to get it to happen right away. And I will tell you, legislators in California make $115,000 a year. Yes. I was just down in California a few months ago and looked that up down there because somebody asked me about it. It's like, are you kidding me? And I actually sent that information to the Speaker of the House, and he said, what, a living wage?
Not California.
Not California, it's not, but it would be here. So it would definitely be that here. But, again, who gets to make the laws? Who gets to look at the situation and make those determinations? That's the hard part. To ask ourselves, and to, realistically call it a citizen legislature. If the citizens, your average citizen, cannot be involved in that in some way, shape, or form because they financially cannot manage it, that is difficult. Yes?
So my take on this, your agency's given you some time off. Back in the 80s, my employer, an insurance company in Portland, asked me to run for Darlene Hooley's vacancy. Now, I didn't get it, but I've often wondered what conflicts of interest I would run into when it was my employer giving me the time off and had recommended that I run for that. And I'm sure that's still going on today. Your own story that your agency's giving you some time off.
They don't give me time off.
Well, that you reduced your hours. Yes, I'm sorry.
Yes, I reduce my hours and I actually do still work.
Yeah.
While being a legislator. Actually take my my work computer to the Capitol with me, which is, as a matter of fact, I've been snarling at facilities there because the Wi-Fi is really a mess at the Capitol right now. It's not as good as it could be. And so, but I still really do, and when I leave here today and go home, I will probably go home and work on some emails tonight.
So do you find conflict of interest between two jobs?
Only in that, and here's the interesting part, you're required to disclose if you have a conflict of interest. So if there were a particular, say, distribution of resources that was going directly to my agency, I would disclose that as a possible conflict of interest. Now, the fact that my agency, among many others throughout the state, received domestic violence funds, not a conflict of interest because I'm not the only one making that decision. Although, I will tell you now, it's a little bit more difficult because I am currently the co-chair of Ways and Means. So here's what I do to avoid that conflict. I do not sign on to any bills that will ask the state for money. Now, if I'm actually moving a bill that I think is important, and I will tell you about one of the bills that I'm moving that's actually very, very important in my opinion, I will definitely assure that it's not going directly to me in any way, shape, or form. Like it's not my agency's money, resources, anything like that. So right now I have a bill. Anybody's heard of 988? 988. In 2020, October of 2020, as a matter of fact, the federal government passed legislation that would allow states to tax telecom, that means your cell phone companies, to initiate a line service or pay for the line service 988, which is the National Suicide Hotline.
Oh.
Yeah. And of course, the very first thing that people say is like, no more taxes! And I heard that a lot too. But at the time that that legislation was passed, I had 4 boys, well, no, at that time there were 3. 3 boys living in my house, none of which were biologically mine at all, they were all foster kids. 2 of whom had issues of depression. And I was paying for then 4 phones. And I thought if we had a level of parity with 911, which means $1.25. If you look at your cell phone bills, you have $1.25 fee on there for 911 every month. You pay $1.25 a month for every phone line you have. So if we were looking at parity with 911, it would cost me $5 a month, $60 a year, to make sure that if either one of those boys, or maybe even both of them, got to a place where they thought they might hurt themselves, that that line would work and someone would answer the phone and talk to them. It was worth it to me. Now, it won't be that much this time, but any amount of money to make sure that there's a phone line there with a trained and skilled human being who could talk one of my kiddos off the ledge. I don't care how much it costs. I really don't. I want that. So that bill is going to go through asking for 50 cents a line to pay $4.988. So when that actually, so it actually did come online legally, technically already here in Oregon, in fact, all over the country on July 16th of this year, of 2022. It came online. Prior to that, the legislature allocated $10 million so that we could start it out and keep it moving and be able to pay for the additional lines that we assumed that would happen. That was one-time money, that was one-time ARPA money. So we do need to figure out how we will pay for it going forward. So I'm not afraid to tell people at all, I am going to try to tax you 50 cents a line. Because I want you or any member of your family, your community, who may be struggling with possibly taking their own life to have an option. And I think they deserve that. And I think that even if we snarl and growl about that 50 cents a line, we won't be if we don't lose the person who's, right next to us. Somebody we care about, somebody we love. It's worth it. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I'm a new resident and voter already in Oregon. What can we do to support your work? What are the conduits to be able to do that?
You know what? I have to say one of the things that I think is so very, very important is just staying engaged. And I will tell you a story about this. One of the other things that I like to do. Well, let's see. Let me just do some counting and calculating here. I think. I have 47 years of sobriety, and I quit drinking really early. And so I work a lot with the addictions community around trying to get resources. I moved in that direction. I will be honest with you, I did not support Measure 110 because it was too fast and it didn't allow us this flexibility to try to set those systems up well ahead of time. We were already in process of moving several things that would require a strategic plan from the Alcohol and Drug Policy Commission, that would require a statewide inventory of the different addiction processes and things that we have throughout the state and look at what we actually need throughout the state. We were already in process with all of that type of thing, so it felt like it was really, really important. But one of the things that really made a huge, huge difference in the bills that we moved in the legislature over the last couple of years is a group called Oregon Recovers. And they're only about 6 years old now, 5 or 6 years old now. But they showed up over and over again in the Capitol. When their bills were up, they showed up. And I remember one time there was a bill that another legislator had that was about actually home delivery of alcohol. And that has since passed. It didn't pass that time. But she had it in committee, and all of these folks with these Oregon Recovers t-shirts, all these people who were living in sobriety, showed up and sat in the front row of the committee hearing, and that bill did not make it out of that committee. because people showed up. Because what was important to them was being talked about, and they showed their support. Now, whether that's in letter form or emails or physically showing up in the Capitol, if there is something important to you, let us know what you feel. Let us know what you think about it. And who's your legislator now? Jules Walters. Yes. You have every right to call her, write her, and she's supposed to respond. Dang it. I try really hard to respond to people when they call me and email me if they're constituents of mine. And Jules is new, of course, but I think she'll get there. She sits like kind of one seat in that way from me, behind me, but she asks a lot of questions, which is good. So I think, let me just say, engagement is really important. Helping people understand what engagement looks like and what overall civics looks like. That's the really hard thing. I think your average human being does not have a clue sometimes about the difference between state government, federal government, county governments, city governments, metro, all of that. It's all quite complicated. And so it makes it hard sometimes. People don't always understand all of the details around it, but getting there and having those conversations and really understanding what we as state legislators can do is actually really, really important. And showing that support for Jules. And is Wagner your senator?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I think Daniel Linn is
He is the other representative.
He's the other representative.
Yeah.
from here.
So there's two representatives, Jules and Daniel.
Yeah.
Yeah, Daniel's cool, I like him. And then the senator is Rob Wagner. I just actually left him at another event earlier, so. But being able to sort of engage with them and let them know what's important to you, I think that's hugely important, yes.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you so much for being here and for your service. I am a city council person. I'm actually council president for West Linn right now.
Fabulous.
I'm Mary Baumgartner. It's nice to meet you. I have a question. It's not emotional, but it's important, and I want to know your opinion on the equity of tolling. I'm sorry, tolling on the roads. Tolling. They're going to toll 205 first, at least that's the plan.
Okay, so I am not a fan of tolling. And I would be perfectly frank, here's the other thing though. Manhattan used to be an island. Just an island. With trees and water and all of that. And the eastern part of the country has tolling everywhere because it's the only way they figured out how to pay for certain things. And I would prefer that we could do it another way. I often tell people I would pay a sales tax before I pump my own gas.
Yes.
I mean, if I thought for a minute I could get a sales tax passed, I would. I mean, I would much rather that we did that than tolling, if we could. The reality of the situation is that because we have chosen, as not just a state, but as a nation, to move towards electric vehicles versus gas to reduce our carbon footprint, that means that the existing gas tax that we have will not be sufficient to continue to build the things that we need to build. And whether we like it or not, the roads are going to be driven on by electric vehicles as well, and they are heavy. They're actually quite heavy. Those batteries are hugely heavy. So we have to figure it out. Again, not a fan, but I don't know what else, I don't know what else we can do about it right this very second. There is not the political will at this moment in time that I'm aware of for a sales tax. So, yes, ma'am.
Thank you for being here. I want to bring it back to civic engagement. My name is Catherine McMullen, and I'm from here. And so one of my jobs is making sure that every eligible voter can exercise their right to vote. And that includes eligible voters that are currently incarcerated and eligible voters that have recently been reintegrated into community. And I was wondering if you have any input or insight on how to move forward with that from the ground level.
I believe there is a bill that's going to be moving in this legislature about that.
So something that fell in the last legislature.
I'm not entirely positive if it's the exact same bill, but I'm almost positive that someone has it, because we've been having a few conversations about it here and there.
Being able to vote if you have so currently serving time for a felony, I know it did
Yes.
not pass last legislature.
Yes.
But I'm really interested in making sure that we're including everyone in this process and letting them know that we want to hear their voice and to be part of the decision making, because that really does empower folks and helps with recidivism as well. So.
I think it does. I think educating people, especially those people who are maybe sitting in a place where they never felt engaged at all or enough to have it make a difference in their lives. I know that because I volunteer at Coffee Creek and at other prisons, that people are like, yay, Tawna, and they send me letters. Can you help me with my getting a pardon or something? Like, okay, yeah, guy, maybe. But, they do understand that there's another way to go about things. And I think some level of civic engagement in the institutions would change things, it would shift things. I think the question that keeps coming up is, would the people at Coffee Creek count for Wilsonville? Or would they be counting for the counties that they fell in?
It would depend on the voter, if they consider themselves a resident of
Right.
where they're from or a resident of the correctional facility.
Right, but then their numbers would be counted in a different way, wouldn't it?
Yeah, they'd be eligible to vote in one place or another, but not both.
Right. Well, I'm thinking more along the lines of, are they counted as sort of residents of this area in particular, whatever area they're in particular? That's because in some instances they are, in some instances they're not. So there may be a bigger kind of a bigger issue there around who would be qualified one way or the other. I know actually now former president of the Senate, my God, his name just fell out of my head. Peter Courtney. He actually passed the bill, the original bill, that required people to go back to the county in which they committed their original crime for minimally 6 months after they exit the prison system, because he didn't want them all staying in Salem. And well, think about it. Back in the day when he passed that bill, prior to that bill passing, it was so expensive to make a phone call for someone to call home to talk to their family. It was so very, very expensive. And so what families would do is they'd move to Salem so that they could be near their relatives, so they could actually have visiting time. And most of the prisons were right around there. And then, of course, we had different ones that moved to different places. But because economically it made more sense to families to be able to be close by, that when then people got out of prison, they just stayed. And I think he didn't like that. So then required everyone to go back to the county in which they fell, and that stopped that problem from continuing. I know it's crazy sometimes we think about the laws we make sometimes that are very intentionally selfish. I'll just say it out loud, I don't care. I mean, I will be honest, I think as a legislator, in my opinion, my job is to serve the community, not just the community that I was elected from. Because I don't just make bills that affect just 43. I don't vote on bills that just affect 43. I vote on bills that affect the entire state of Oregon. And so therefore my job is to make sure that I'm thinking about everyone and not just my tiny little pocket of the world. And so being really cognizant and clear then that everyone matters in this situation. And while, again, very much like a bill, as long as everybody's not happy, we're good. Right? We can't make everyone happy. We'll do the best we can to make a lot of people happy, but that's all we can do.
But do you feel like you have a greater responsibility to the people you represent than you do to the general population?
Depends. Actually, now let me just be real clear. My district, House District 43, is north and northeast Portland. It's Irvington. It's Alameda. It's
Okay.
it's Concordia. I mean, we're not suffering over there. We're not. But one of the biggest issues that comes up for our district, though, is housing. And so, but that issue is not just a 43 issue. It's an entire state issue. So the issues that affect my district are things like that, like housing, like the Tubman Middle School that needs to be moved. So I work that situation, like policing, which needs to be done differently, which means we need to get more resources into the Department of DPSST. Oh, God.
Department of Safety Standards.
Safety Standards and Practice, yes. Oh, my gosh, the acronyms are killing me these days. We need to put more resources into that agency so that they can actually train more officers. And we're finally getting that. It actually has happened over the last couple of emergency boards that we've gotten more resources. So there's about 20 classes that we'll go through in a year. So that we'll be able to get more police into positions. So those types of things are very, very important to my district. And I'll be honest, I don't know that I would say that, well, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. That's just always been my thing. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. And so, but the few that I represent, their needs are very similar to everyone else's. They want, they need housing to be built so that there's not, homeless camps just outside our back doors, which there is actually just outside my back lawn. Because I live right up on the edge of 33rd and Lombard. I live really, like my backyard is that the entrance to Lombard, just over the fence. So, we have the same, Concordia was it's like 3 blocks away from my house. Which means, the concerns of people in my district are what's going to happen with Concordia. Thank goodness we're going to do something good with it, right? But, I think it's what matters to all Oregonians is that people feel safe and that they're not having to watch people struggle. So, other questions?
Well, I think about, I have family in California who live in rural areas and feel like they don't get represented and I think you have that same dynamic here in Oregon.
Right. And
just because of the numbers, they just don't have them.
So do they feel like they don't get represented because they don't hear what's happening, or they don't feel like they're engaged in the process and no one's listening?
I just think numbers-wise, rural communities don't have as many people, and so the number of representatives that they have in the legislature is lower, and their issues don't get, they may get brought up, but there isn't the.
Well, and I will tell you one of the key issues in my mind is balance, of course, and of course not making anybody entirely happy. But the reality of the situation, I mentioned that domestic violence bill that passed actually back in 2001 or 2002, I think. Was the first distribution of real resources out across the state for domestic violence services. And one of the things that we did prior to that actual distribution of resources was assuring a base of equity in terms of resources so that population and demographics of space didn't rule the numbers, right? the reality of you can't build a domestic violence program if you're just basing it on the, 10,000 people that you have in that area. You have to build it on the need that's in that area, which means everybody was given a base number of funding. And then we went from population beyond that, because that created a level of equity to support the services in those areas. And then since then, and I'm actually, as co-chair of Ways and Means, one of the things I'm always looking at is making sure that because rural areas don't have the tax level, tax base and or the economic ability to assure that things like their civic infrastructure, their basic infrastructure is taken care of, we're always making sure that we put some resources in those directions. Like they're not going to get a new bridge built or a levee park, on a reverse base built if they don't have the additional resources to do it. It's not going to happen. So making sure that those things are done equitably even in rural areas is difficult because, some folks might think they need it in this rural area versus that rural area too. So it's not an easy thing to do, but we really do try hard to make sure that rural areas do have the resources that they need, because otherwise they wouldn't be able to get it on their own. That's just the reality of the situation. Yes, ma'am.
You made a comment about Concordia, and I'm not up to speed, but you said something.
University of Oregon is going to, the Balmers, can't remember the first names, Balmers have given, I think it was $500 million to develop what they refer to as now the Balmer Institute for Mental Health, Behavioral Health. And so that Balmer Institute will go into, actually one of the bigger buildings, the library there at Concordia University will be turned into what's called the Balmer Institute. They will be doing training for folks who are going to be mental health service providers in schools. Right? And then the rest of the university will be all of the different U of O services that are there in the city. I guess there's a downtown area, I think it was Whitestag or something, that building. The majority of those classes and those pieces are actually going to move to Concordia. So it will be being used by the University of Oregon. It's pretty exciting, actually. Yeah. Very exciting. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. I just have one more question. I have been involved for a couple of years now in local and regional government and going to League of Oregon Cities conferences and national conferences. And I do not see a presence of Indigenous people represented, and I don't understand really what the opportunity missed here, or is there a tribal presence in the state legislature? Do tribal councils get invited to participate? Or how is this working? And it doesn't look like it's working very well to me, but I thought you might.
I do actually know that. So I don't remember exactly when it passed. I can't remember the year it passed, but there was legislation. I think it was Atia who did it. But basically there is something called the Legislative Commission on Indian Services, and they have an office in the Capitol. They meet with the tribal leaders 4 times a year plus actually, to discuss the tribe's needs in terms of legislation. They have 2 representatives, 1 Democrat, 1 Republican, and 2 senators, 1 Democrat and 1 Republican, that also sit on that legislative commission as non-voting members. I am one of them. And we often carry the bills that the tribes need to go to the legislature in order to actually get, the things that they need. So maybe more recently, one of the bills that I was able to carry for the tribes in the state of Oregon, and actually just for the children in the state of Oregon, was embedding the Indian Child Welfare Act. The federal Indian Child Welfare Act is now in Oregon statute. Yeah, it is really kind of amazing, actually. So I don't know if you're aware, though, that the federal Indian Child Welfare Act is under attack. There are folks who are trying to say that it's not constitutional, which of course it has been proven to be constitutional based on the legal standing of tribes in the country and the government-to-government relationships. So in order to assure the safety of Native children here in the state of Oregon, I was able to move that bill and pass it in 2020. We actually, when the 2020 session fell apart in March, I was actually able to ask the speaker to put it in one of the special sessions, so it was able to pass there. So that was the first part of it. The second part of it that included the issues around adoption came in the 21 session. So we got that one through as well. So there is actually a lot of tribal engagement. I don't know if anybody noticed the tribes were sitting up front when the governor was inaugurated on Monday, sworn in. And there is a distinct government-to-government relationship, in particular with Health and Human Services. They have the SB 77, Senate Bill 770 cluster groups that meet quarterly as well. So they meet around child welfare and all of those different things, but there is a required government-to-government relationship. And one of my upcoming bills will be actually to require a distinct level of tribal consultation with regard to the state agencies. They are already required to do it, but there's not actually anything written that says exactly how they will do it. And so it's going to be long-term negotiations with the tribes, very similarly to the way we did the ICWA bill, to assure that each tribe has their unique process to deal with state agencies, because it is already required. State agencies just don't always do it. And so we're going to try to put it into statute to assure that they have to do it. Yes, ma'am.
How many recognized federally recognized tribes do we have in Oregon? 9.
Yes. And that actually, there's 9 federally recognized tribes, and but then there's, somewhere near there's bands, smaller tribes within those confederations. Anytime you hear the word confederation on the beginning of a tribe, it generally means there's a conglomeration of tribes put together on a reservation, so, or tribal lands, however you want to identify that. So. Okay, folks, if there's no more questions, we good? All right. Well, thanks so much for coming and listening.